As we continue to explore algebraic expressions, which are different from equations in that they don't have an equal sign, right? They're just pieces of an equation, I'd like to introduce some vocabulary. So when we look at algebraic expressions, we want to be able to distinguish between terms and factors. So we'll look at these with examples. But briefly, terms are pieces of an algebraic expression that we add or subtract. So we're looking for plus and minus signs when we're looking to distinguish terms. And factors are parts of an algebraic expression that we multiply together. So we're going to look for terms first, and then have a look at the factors that compose them. We'll do this with 4 examples. So starting with 8x squared minus 2x plus 18. How many terms do you see? Remembering that terms are the pieces we add and subtract. So here we've got an 8 multiplied by x squared, so that's multiplication. But then we hit our minus sign. And then 2 times x, that's multiplication again. So when we're multiplying, those are factors, not terms. And then we hit a plus sign again, and finally we hit the 18. So what I've done is I've circled the 3 terms in this first expression. So first term is 8x squared, and then negative 2x, and then positive 18. So these 3 are added together to give us the expression. In order to look at factors, we're going to look at each term at a time. And we're going to ask ourselves the question, what are the pieces that are being multiplied together to give us each term? And we're going to keep this very big picture, which means for 8x squared, it's sufficient to say, oh, I see that there's an 8 being multiplied by x squared. It's possible you've looked at prime factors as well, and we will again look at prime factors when we look at adding fractions and start to find the lowest common denominator to do so. I could write down the prime factors for this, so this is the prime factors here, which means I'd be looking for the prime values that compose the 8 and the x squared. So I'd have 2, 2, and 2 for the 8. 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. And x because x and x are x squared. For the purposes of this exercise, we're just going to write down the factors. So keep these simple and not expand them into prime factors, but we should be keeping this in the back of our minds. So the factors for negative 2x then are just negative 2 and x. Although you may want to think of them as negative 1, 2, and x. Those would be the prime factors. For 18, what's being multiplied together? It's okay to just put 18 here under this definition of factor. Prime factors, we'd look at 2, 3, and 3. If you need a refresher on finding prime factors, we'll have a look at that when we look at lowest common denominator. And what about the second one? How many terms do you see? Again, very big picture. I'm not going to look at all of the plus and minus signs. These are within some brackets. I think of this as 5 times bracket minus 16 times x times bracket. So how many terms? Well, there are just 2 terms here. 5 being multiplied by x plus 2. And then we'll take that 5 and x plus 2 and subtract 16 times x times y plus 4 squared. Really everywhere, every time that I say times multiplied by, what I'm really doing is listing the factors. The factors for the first term are 5 and x plus 2. And for the second term are negative 16. You see that that's multiplied by an x, and that's multiplied by a y plus 4 squared. Now here's an easy place to make an error. It would be easy for the first term to say that, well, I see a 5, I see an x, and I see a positive 2. So perhaps the factors are 5, x, and 2. But what you should be able to do is have somebody tell you what the factors are, and then be able to come up with the term without knowing what it was. Again, factors are things that are multiplied together. So if you tell me that the factors are 5x and 2, I'm going to take the 5, the x, and the 2, multiply them together and get 10x. And I'm going to assume that the term we're all talking about is 10x. But it isn't. It's 5 times x plus 2, which I would conclude if you told me the factors were 5 and x plus 2. So this is incorrect. So we move on to the third example. I strongly suggest that you pause the video and fill out the terms and factors for the next two examples on your own. How many terms are there in this one? Well, the only strange thing going on here is the radical sign. So we can treat that as though we just had brackets, remembering that a square root will essentially trap everything underneath it or group everything underneath it in brackets. We just don't need to write those. So we can very much treat this as we did the previous problem. So we've got 3x plus 1, then we hit a minus sign, then 8 times x times the square root of x plus 1, and then 6. So we have three terms. 3x plus 1 squared, negative 8x, x plus 1, and finally positive 6. 6 is the easy one for factors, and really none of them are too challenging here. 3x plus 1, we could write this twice, so 3x plus 1 comma 3x plus 1, or it's okay to shortcut it and say that we simply have two of those by indicating that 3x plus 1 is squared. And then for the middle term, we've got negative 8 being multiplied by x, and that's being multiplied by the square root of x plus 1. Certainly we could dive deeper. We could have a look at any of these factors and ask ourselves how many terms are within a factor. For example, the square root of x plus 1, if we dive into that factor, I see two terms, the x and the 1. And terms, of course, have more factors. So what I'm suggesting we do is we stay one layer further out than that, right? We're just looking at the overarching geography of this expression. Don't dig too deep. But for this last question, the only thing that's different here is that we have a symbol. We've got a pi in the middle of the first term. It's not a big deal. We've got 4 times pi times x. And again, I'm really just reading off the factors as I say times to indicate that they're multiplied together. We have a second term of negative 3x squared. So you can think of this as adding negative 3x squared. And then a third term, negative 12 times x squared plus 2. So for negative 3x squared, the factors are negative 3 and x squared. And for the final term, we have negative 12 and x squared plus 2.